with the Pistons on offense. Brook drove the lane, but Steppy wasn't peppy. And Oldham, as if on cue, swatted him into the middle of 1986. And then not long after, Steppy squared up on MJ. All of a sudden, his confidence had reached new heights, took him one-on-one and hit an absolute circus shot. However, he committed the offensive foul on the drive against MJ.
Steppy squared up on MJ. I don't know, it got a giggle out of me.
It did. But I'm really happy to know about this little footnote in NBA history, Brook Steppy. I'd actually love to get him on the podcast, to be honest, and chat about his career, and that's 100% genuine.
One steppy at a time.
One steppy at a time, exactly right. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single steppy. Right.
I always like to say that Michael got to play with me for a year at North Carolina. I think it really helped him.
Spectacular player from the beginning.
You can see right away Jordan was going to be a big-time scorer.
And showed what an impact he was going to have on the league.
This is NB85, celebrating the 30-year anniversary of Michael Jordan's rookie season in the NBA. And now, your hosts, Adam Ryan and Aaron Steen.
Welcome back, Aaron, to another episode of NB85, mate. We're up to episode 19 of the series. How are you today, mate?
Adam, exciting times here on the NB85 podcast. The mothership, inallairness.com, has loosened the purse strings and opened the budget a little bit, and I've moved into the ritzy new downtown Tacoma recording studios, mate. Very exciting day.
Good to hear, mate. It looks like a pretty sweet setup there, I can see in the background, so good work on that front. Now today, mate, we're going to be chatting about two more of the Chicago Bulls regular season games from the 84-85 season. Our first game for discussion,
Chicago versus Philadelphia, February 1st, 1985.
The game was played at the Spectrum in Philadelphia in front of 17,921 fans. Chicago were coached by Kevin Lockery and the 76ers were led by Billy Cunningham. The game DVD that we allegedly had access to, mate, it was a Bulls TV coverage, and the commentators were Milo Hamilton and John Mengelt. They were on the call of the game. A quick random stat for this contest. The 76ers were 27-1 when heading into the fourth quarter of a game with the lead. Quite ominous. And Rod Higgins started 5 games in the 85 season for Chicago, and this was one of them.
Into the first quarter, first and foremost, a mention of legendary Sixers PA guy Dave Zinkoff, famously known for his style of announcing Philadelphia Warriors and 76ers games, especially his introduction of the Whirling Dervish from the University of Massachusetts, number 6, Captain of the Philadelphia 76ers, Julius the Dr. Irving. He, along with the Boston Celtics PA guy, Andy Jick from the 1980s, they were two of the most iconic voices of that era when it came to other PA guys in arenas, and both of whom had their own unique, terrific style. As it was the Bulls' first visit to Philadelphia for the season, their entire lineup was introduced, and MJ got a terrific ovation from the Spectrum crowd.
Clearly, the crowd were right into it from the beginning, and what a great crowd they were. I also really enjoy watching those full team introductions when you get a chance to see them on these game DVDs, and it's really good to see the journeyman guys, who are the ones that are usually buried 7 deep on the bench, and you only ever see their face on the front of the 1980s basketball cards.
The Bulls started the much taller Steve Johnson on Charles Barkley in this game. John Mengelt then also made the point that Barkley probably had a few pounds on Johnson.
That's not the only time that they refer to Barkley's weight in this contest.
Speaking of, Milo Hamilton then said that Barkley was 6'6" and all muscle, to which Mengelt replied with a chuckle, "I don't know if he's all muscle."
It's great because later on in the game, and I make mention of it a couple of times as well, there's a few offhanded remarks to do with Sir Charles, so funny stuff.
Early in the first quarter, MJ palmed the ball off a defensive rebound. Milo Hamilton said that he handles that thing like a ping pong ball. Such was the size of MJ's hands. He then put his first score on the board, coming off a screen and buried a foul line jumper. With the game tied at 8 off a mini fast break by the 76ers, Mo Cheeks handed it off to the Doc on the break in the lane for a big one-handed jam. On the next play of the game, MJ snuck behind Andrew Toney under the hoop, received the pass over the top, and came up on the other side of the hoop for a one-handed flush with his leg splayed. It looked really, really cool. The next Chicago Bulls home game on February 5th versus the world champion Boston Celtics, the first 10,000 fans into Chicago Stadium received a limited edition pair of Chicago Tribune shoelaces.
Interesting to note. It's a pity it wasn't against the Washington Bullets, and then it would have been jean shoe laces. Anyhow, moving on.
Then on February 12 versus the Pistons, it was Kendall bumper sticker night. First 10,000 into the stadium received a Bulls bumper sticker courtesy of Kendall Motor Oil.
I actually really enjoyed seeing all these
same
game notifications about the upcoming promotions. So, yeah, it's quite a good throwback to the old days.
At the 5-minute, 10-second mark of the first, the Sixers were up 16-14. The Sixers were playing volleyball on the backboards in this opening quarter. They were just killing the Bulls on the offensive boards. The Doc hit Quentin Richardson with a beautiful backdoor pass after MJ played off Richardson just a little bit, and then Julius hit him with a perfect pass through 3 Chicago defenders, no less, and Quentin Richardson got the score. On the very next play, Dave Corzine beat the Sixers down court and caught the long pass under the hoop. He then threw 2 pump fakes, sending Julius Erving and Charles Barkley flying by, with Mo Cheeks eventually coming in and fouling him. It was quite humorous to watch it, as it looked like Dave was in slow-mo as he threw the fakes, and the far superior athletes of Barkley and Erving just went flying by him. Charles then got hit with a tee on the no call on the 3-second violation, as it really did appear as though Corzine was camped in the lane, pump faking the 76ers lineup into the third row. On February 1st, 1985, 76, I'm sure that's just a coincidence, but $76 bought you a season ticket for the remainder of the season and a guaranteed playoff seat as well. $76.
It's really crazy when you think about it.
Which is why, and we've always said that hindsight's a very handy thing, but to look at that figure of $76, it's quite extraordinary, mate.
Hashtag inflation. Keep going.
Late in the first quarter, Moses Malone missed on a bunny under the hoop, then caught his own miss and hit on an incredible double clutch half windmill lay-in, which gave the 76ers a 22-20 lead. MJ finished the first quarter with the much taller Bobby Jones on him defensively at the small forward spot. John Mengelt said that Julius Erving was asked about Michael Jordan before the game, to which he responded, "The intern is learning very quickly."
That's a good quote.
Then to finish out the first quarter, Q Rich got blocked by Ennis Watley, then recovered to put in a buzzer beater to give the Sixers a 28-26 lead after one.
Are you giving Richardson a 2015-esque nickname?
That is correct.
I love it. Great stuff. I'll get into the second quarter, mate, but there's a quick comment I believe you'd like to make here.
Yeah, the Bulls missed a few bunnies, as described by the announcers. It was then said that they mustn't be fans of Playboy.
I couldn't believe it when I heard that, because initially I thought, did I just hear that? Because it was said so offhanded, but it just run of the mill, no worries. We'll just quickly throw it in there, in amongst the commentary. So yeah, good stuff there from the Bulls TV commentators. Now, into the second quarter, referee Jess Kersey actually tweaked his ankle near the Bulls bench, and he was attended to by Mark Feil, who was Chicago's trainer. Just a quick side note, he was with the Bulls until June of 1990, and then he was replaced by Loyola Marymount trainer, and a name familiar to most fans of this podcast, I'm sure, Robert Chip Schaefer. You don't often see a referee actually getting attended to by one of the other trainers, so the game stopped for a couple of minutes, and Feil had to actually tape up Kersey's ankle. Rod Higgins, as I mentioned, he started the game, only 1 of 5 for the entire season. He was having a good game to begin with. On the back of a made jumper and 2 free throws, he'd racked up 10 points already, and the Bulls extended out to a 6-point lead, all the while with MJ on the bench getting some valuable rest. And with about 6 minutes 30 left in the half, Philadelphia called for timeout. It wasn't overly pretty at that stage, and I've got in my notes here that both teams were continuing to struggle from the field. Following said timeout, Jordan was back into the game, and he instantly hit a tough fadeaway jumper that gave him 11 points for the game, and the Bulls are up 36-30.
I actually made note that during this second quarter that the offense of the 76ers looked absolutely broken.
With good reason too, because there was just terrible shots being put up and missed. One's really close to the basket. Not great to watch, mate, was it?
No.
Julius Erving then drove to the hoop for a hanging layup with Jordan right in his grill. And I wrote down that it maybe was a welcome to the NBA type gesture from the good doctor. However, MJ played great D and the house call was not answered. Good ball movement from the 76ers led to quite a few easy scores in this game, so they started to get back on track towards the end of this second quarter. You could really sense that their teamwork was a notch or two above Chicago's for some stretches of the contest. The Sixers clawed themselves right back into the game, tying it up at 40, and then the Bulls had to call for timeout.
Yeah, it was definitely in the first 6 minutes of this second quarter where I guess both teams, but it was noticeable in particular how much the Sixers were struggling with their offense, but they did pick it up in the second half of the second quarter.
It was a quarter of two halves.
Correct.
Which is an eighth, if I'm not mistaken.
An eighth of the game.
I could be wrong. Moving on, mate, moving on. MJ missed on a very acrobatic drive to the hoop, which led to a 76ers fast break. Bobby Jones missed the layup, but Charles Barkley was there to slam home the rebound, and that capped a 13-point turnaround, with Philly now leading 47-42. I've also got in my notes here, it's stating the obvious, but I'll still say it anyhow. Moses Malone was a beast. He absolutely outmuscled pretty much everybody on the block and was having a really good first half.
Is it of your understanding that he stood about 6'10", as far as his height goes, of course?
Yeah, 6'10", I believe. I think he might have been listed as 6'11" or even a 7-footer sometimes, depending on who you asked and what you read back in the day, but I'm sure he wasn't even close to being 7 foot.
I tell you what, if he actually stood at 6'10", he played like he was about twice that height. It was a real handful down low, wasn't he?
Certainly was, mate. He was great to watch, particularly at this sort of stage of his career where he was still probably just past his peak.
Yeah.
But boy, he was very, very effective.
Very aggressive down low. Like he had no issue at all with using his body, his bulk, dropping a shoulder into a player to try to get a rebound. Very aggressive down low.
Oh, would have been great to have him on the Bulls squad, that's for sure. Now, late in the second quarter, Steve Johnson hammered home and MJ missed near the hoop. And there was a somewhat strange end to the half. Mo Cheeks was fouled about 38 feet from the hoop on a three-point attempt just before the buzzer went, and he hit 2 free throws. There was no lineup, and the 76ers wrestled back the momentum of this game. No one really knew what was going on at the time the foul was called. To close out the half, MJ had 15 points, Rod Higgins and Dave Corzine had 10 points each, and for the 76ers, Moses had 15, Charles had 10, and Dr. J had 7. Now, the 76ers took a 6-point lead, 55-49, into the break.
Then moving into the third quarter, it was actually a good start to the third quarter for the Bulls defensively. They picked up a rare 10-second call on the 76ers early on. Then they had back-to-back turnovers, which led to back-to-back scores for the 76ers, who extended their lead out to 10 points and an irate Kevin Lockery timeout.
Not the first time for the season, I'm sure, and not the last.
They advertised the upcoming game at home at the Chicago Stadium versus the Indiana Pacers, and unsurprisingly, no promotional night. History would show with a crowd of just 7,782 at the stadium for the game. You can see why they did that. They'd have to move it from the first 10,000 to the first 5,000 for them to be not left with any promo items.
Never a good look if they actually have a few thousand promo items that weren't given away for free.
Left over, yeah, exactly. The doc cherry-picked for the Sixers' 8th dunk of the game off the Bulls' 3rd turnover in 4 possessions to start the second half, so it wasn't a great start for the Bulls. The score was then stretched out to 64-49 in favour of Philly off an Andrew Toney 3-point play. MJ picked up his 17th point off a baseline-to-baseline floating one-hand lay-in. On the very next Bulls possession, Jordan got past Irving on the baseline, only to miss the ensuing dunk attempt by essentially throwing the ball over the top of the hoop. Do you remember that?
I do. It was quite an unusual one. And a couple of really big jams in this game, though. You mentioned earlier about the Sixers having already 8 dunks.
8 dunks, yeah.
The good doctor had a few more in the second half, and there was an interesting missed attempt by Barkley, which I'll get to a bit later on as well.
Off a mini break by the Bulls, Wes Matthews handed off to Jordan, who jumped, got a Sixer defender hand on the ball, then came up on the other side to bank in the beautiful finish and the 70-55 Sixer lead with 5:20 remaining. That was a true Air Jordan move. Twice late in the third quarter, the Bulls doubled down on Moses in the post and actually stole the ball from him. Moses then retorted by abusing Dave Corzine down low to give him 23 points and Philly an 11-point lead. Then Corzine, never one to be outdone, hit a 17-foot corner jumper on Moses at the other end. Corzine actually looked like he'd been shot at this point in time of the game, as he was really labouring to get up and down the court. Then, as you mentioned earlier on, another comment about Barkley probably weighing more than his listed 260 pounds. The boys also mentioned that Q had dropped from 202 to 192 as per a request from the team to trim his weight down. Judging by some of his off-court issues, I don't want to know how he got that weight off.
Oh, jeez.
I'd love to know what the actual dynamic of that 76er team was like. Charles always says how much influence that those veterans like Moses, Bobby Jones, Mo Cheeks, and Julius Erving had on him, but I've also heard that those guys didn't like how lazy he was as a rookie.
Yeah, that's a perfect point, because I've heard both sides of the story as well. More so, I've actually heard the fact they didn't actually like the way he played. So, interesting if we could actually ever get the truth out of some of these guys. Maybe in time, we will.
Then after three quarters, the score was 87-76, and the quarter was finished out with Charles Barkley absolutely destroying a Quinton Daly shot attempt.
Into the fourth quarter, the Bulls were actually fighting to stay in the game at this point. As I mentioned, the 76ers were 27-1 when heading into the fourth with a lead, and they were looking to put the Bulls to the sword. Now, driving baseline, Jordan got called for an offensive foul. He dug his shoulder into Andrew Toney, who's probably in the starting five of the all-first-name team, and things weren't looking great for Chicago. Compound that with a technical foul call on an irate Kevin Lockery, and the Bulls were now down by 13. Sidney Green threw down a big-time tip dunk off a missed Bulls shot, so that was pretty cool to see. He had 14 points. He ultimately finished up with 16, which was his equal season high for the 85 season. MJ made a very tough shot, a high off-glass basket and the foul. He missed the resulting free throw, but the Bulls grabbed the offensive board. It went to Quinton Daly, who hit the jumper, and that brought the margin back to just 7 points. They were making a mini run. It was 101-94. 76ers veterans like Julius Erving and Mo Cheeks kept the Bulls at bay, and I wrote in here that they hit key jumpers, and in Irving's case, he had a nice open court jam too. MJ almost hit a gorgeous driving layup, and he froze Mo Cheeks near the free throw line on a hesitation dribble. Jordan hit both free throws, giving him 27 points, and the Bulls were within 5. Then off a Rod Higgins steal, Jordan hit a tough 15-footer, and all of a sudden, the Bulls were only down by 3. However, Mo Cheeks pretty much put pay to that. He followed it up with a long bucket, then a steal, and a subsequent drive to the hoop. He drew the foul. He made both free throws, and that extended Philly's lead back out to 7. Here's where the game ended for Chicago. They turned it over again on the very next play, and Charles Barkley, a.k.a., and I quote, the freight train, drove strong to the hoop, and then he took a nasty spill to the floor, landing very awkwardly on his rear end.
It's an unconfirmed rumour that John Mangelt actually came up with the nickname of the weight train.
After he missed that dunk, it rebounded back towards the three-point line, and Bobby Jones corralled the missed shot and then scored the bucket, leaping over Barkley in the process because Charles was on the floor looking like he's trying to shake off the fall. Anyhow, a quick side note from Mangelt. He said, "Whoa, that's a lot of meat to be hitting the floor." I had to actually go back and play that a second and third time to make sure he said the word meat when he referred to hitting the floor. But that is dead set legit. Now, back to the game. MJ was immediately whistled for an offensive foul. He scored his last 2 points of the contest on a nice hanging jumper, which gave him 31 for the game. And then, mate, I've got a note here. Chris Engler checked into the game in the closing moments. It was really good to see him get some playing time. He wore the number 34 for the Bulls, and that number would, of course, be worn by Charles Oakley next season in Chicago for the 1986 campaign going forwards. The game ended. Oh, of course the game ended. The fourth quarter was over. The game was finished with a final score of 121-110. Philadelphia were 11-point winners. The Bulls dropped to 24-23 on the season, and in contrast, the 76ers were 37-9. So they were absolutely firing. And for the Bulls, Jordan had 31, 6 boards and 5 assists. Quentin Daly had 18 points. Sidney Green had one of the best games of his early career, 16 points and 14 boards. And Dave Corzine also had a good game with 14 points. For the 76ers, Moses Malone had 23 points, 9 rebounds and 3 steals. Dr. J had 19 points. Mo Cheeks had 16 points and 8 assists. And Sir Charles Barkley, 15 points and 11 rebounds, mate. Anything you'd like to add about that particular game, or should we just move on?
I think we can just move on.
Good call. Now, the second game we're going to be chatting about today, mate, is an absolute pearler. It's often referred to as the revenge game. And in revenge for what, I hear you ask? In response to the alleged freeze-out of Michael Jordan from the 1985 NBA All-Star Game.
Detroit versus Chicago, February 12th, 1985.
The game was played at Chicago Stadium in Chicago, Illinois, in front of 13,363 people. Detroit were led by the famous Chuck Daly, of course, and the TV coverage that we saw for this game, mate, was the Pistons coverage. The main announcer was George Blaha, and he was assisted by Dave Bing on the call of the game.
Usually when having to listen to the opposing team's call of the game, it's usually quite disappointing, but don't mind listening to George Blaha's voice.
Yeah. Now, also, speaking of the 85 All-Star Game, some blatant, shameless self-promotion here. Episode 18 of this series, inallairness.com/NB85-18. That'll take you straight to the show notes and the file itself to listen to for a great recap of the 85 All-Star Game.
One of our finest episodes.
One of many, mate. But yeah, that was an absolute pearler. I enjoyed it.
We keep the bar high. The expectations of the listening audience now must be through the roof. So,
without doubt, mate. They're on tenterhooks. A random stat for this contest, Chicago was at full strength with the return of both Corbell Jones and David Greenwood. It was the first time, I think, in over a month that they actually had their full lineup to choose from. Detroit had won 14 of its last 18 games prior to this contest, and Chicago's Sidney Green enjoyed his first career start.
We have spoken about dead air during breaks in the game on previous episodes of NB85. This one had dead air, but it had communications from a producer over top of the footage, just for something different.
Yeah, that was quite strange, and I was trying to listen to what the producer was saying whilst I was listening to Blaha and Bing, but I'm just hoping that they weren't hearing that in their ears at the same time, because that'd be awfully confusing if they were trying to make sense of what was being said whilst they were actually doing the call, but I'm sure it wasn't.
The aforementioned Blaha and Bing spoke about how many shots MJ had gotten up in the All-Star game in Indianapolis and the alleged freeze-out. Dave Bing said that it would help fire Jordan up for this game.
It was obviously notable enough that the Detroit commentators were even making mention of the fact that there was this alleged stoush of sorts between Jordan and Thomas leading back to the All-Star game a few days prior.
During the introductions of both teams, Chicago native Isaiah Thomas got a nice applause from the crowd, a John Stark contrast to latter seasons in the Bulls-Pistons rivalry. And I swear there was a couple of boos as Dave Corzine was introduced.
Very impressive. Very impressive how you worked Stark into that one.
MJ's first few scores of this game were about as easy as he'd ever hoped to get against the Detroit Pistons. The first was a far too easy coast-to-coast through the Pistons D for the layup. And his second was off a lazy Pistons inbounds pass that he stole for an easy score around Lambeer. His third was off a steal playing the passing lanes and the fast break dunk to give Chicago the 16-10 edge with 6:55 remaining in the first. I really get the feeling that in 1985, Bill Lambeer hadn't worked his way into the villain role that everyone would know and love him for later on in his career. Would you agree?
I would agree. Also, I'm going to be a little controversial here and actually suggest that I quite liked Bill Lambeer in this part of his career. Before he became perhaps the notorious bad boy, or whatever you want to describe him as, I thought he was a really clever player and he made the most of his ability as far as being on the court, but he certainly pushed the limits of what was allowed. But I actually thought he was really good to watch, and I would have loved to have had him as a member of the Bulls. Of course, that would never actually happen, and we ended up pretty much reviling the guy.
One of the first games of NBA basketball that I saw was during the 1990 NBA Finals when Billy Laimbeer had a couple of really good games shooting the three ball. And at that point in time, I didn't really know anything about him, about his past, and the way that the Bulls fans, experienced Bulls fans felt about him. So I actually was also a fan of him early on. It was, soon after that I learned who he was. That soon changed.
It did. I think during those 1990 finals, I'm pretty sure in one of the contests, he at least had maybe 5 made threes.
Yeah.
Maybe 6.
Yeah. That was the game that I saw him play. I actually quite liked him after having seen that game. But yeah, as I mentioned, that like soon turned to dislike.
Yeah, quite quickly too.
Orlando's amazing athleticism was on display as he put the ball on the floor and bullied Terry Tyler and Laimbeer for the M1 score at the hoop to put Chicago up 25-16. On the next possession, he had the smaller John Long switch onto him and he scored easily. And not a word of a lie, Bill Laimbeer went 0 for 25 on jump shots in his first term. He just could not get one to go.
Nice exaggeration.
The play of the first term came off a Vinnie Johnson miss. Dave Corzine outlets the pass off the rebound to Wes Matthews, who takes it in on Vinny, only to dump it over his head to the streaking Orlando Woolridge for a very sweet two-hand power jam and a 30-18 Chicago lead.
One of the many great highlights of Orlando throughout that season.
Agreed. Orlando absolutely destroyed the Pistons in this first quarter as him and MJ played a nice pick and roll that got Orlando 2 free throws on the next play. Dave Bing made the valid point that rookie Tony Campbell for the Pistons was allowing the bigger Woolridge to get positioned too deep towards the basket as he again put Orlando on the line on the very next play. The Bulls shot the ball very well to start the game, going 14 for 22 to start out the first quarter. As you mentioned earlier on, Caldwell Jones was activated for this game off his injury, but didn't play as Juwan Oldham checked in for Dave Corzine in the first quarter, along with one of the great NBA names, Major Jones, who checked in for the Pistons.
And Major Jones is Caldwell Jones' brother. Let's take a minor detour to talk Major Jones. Now, his full name is Major James Brooks Jones, which is pretty cool in itself. This 1985 season would be his last in the NBA, and he played 6 seasons in the league. He was one of the 4 Jones brothers, Caldwell, Charles, and the lesser-known Will.
Just a very quick question for yourself, Adam. Vinnie Johnson and Quentin Daly were both very similar players, don't you think?
Yes. The short answer is yes. I do think that they could both get really hot really quick. Certainly wouldn't be afraid to jack up multiple shots. Even if they were missing, they'd still continue to shoot. And when they got onto a roll, yeah, definitely. Obviously, Vinny had a bit more bulk, which certainly helped him in certain parts of the game as well. But yeah, that's a good call, mate. I like that.
Yeah, just think that the instant offense that they brought made them both very similar players. And just from memory, I don't think Vinny was what you call an elite defender either. So, it kind of made both of them one-way players on the court.
Yeah, they were well matched offensively to each other. Weren't overly well known for their defense.
The last play of the quarter, MJ was out high with Isaiah on him. George Blaha said, "It's the matchup everyone wants to see." So that alleged freeze out was definitely in the front of everyone's minds during the game. MJ takes Isaiah into the paint off the dribble, spins and dumps a terrific pass to Juwan Oldham for a dunk. As the quarter expired, Sidney Green threw up a shot from the other end of the court that hit the Jumbotron. That's something that I've never really noticed before. Actually see it hit the Jumbotron.
Yeah, I can't really recall it ever happening before, but the thing that made me notice it more so was the fact that while the camera was panning towards the other basket, it then went back towards the other end because the ball actually ricocheted towards the Pistons bench. Strange.
Which left the score at 41-31, Chicago after one.
Now, mate, I've actually noted down here, I'd love to know what Jordan's true feelings were about his relationship with Isaiah. both now in 2015, but also at this particular time in their careers in 1985. They had played against one another a few times before MJ hit the pros, and we touched on that in a previous episode of this series, which was most notably NB85-3. So that was definitely worth a listen if you haven't already taken a sampling of that one. Now, this game, of course, was just days after that alleged All-Star game freeze-out, and in our next episode, NB85, episode 20, we'll sprinkle in a few quotes from MJ that followed this game, which I found particularly intriguing.
Yeah, if you paid attention to some of the comments about MJ that came out of Isaiah's mouth, you would have thought that they were blood brothers to the end, because Isaiah was a bit sickly sweet when it came to his comments about MJ and about how much he liked him. So, but they definitely contradicted the alleged freeze out and what we heard in subsequent years.
Yes. Detroit scored 8 of the first 10 points to start this second quarter, and then following another Vinnie Johnson jumper, he already had 12 points at this stage. They trailed by just 4 points, 43-39. During this quarter, a stat flashed up on the screen, which was very interesting. I wish I could find another word instead of saying interesting every second word. Quinton Daly was 4th in the NBA in off-the-bench scoring at 16.5 points a game. So that was a pretty impressive stat there.
Interesting.
Interesting indeed. Vinnie Johnson went into heat check mode, which I've got in here was appropriate given his nickname, canning a ridiculous off-balance jumper. Jordan then hit a nice 12-foot jumper in the lane over an outstretched Isaiah Thomas. The next time down the floor, he isolated Zeke and broke him down on the drive, hitting another 2. Beautiful to watch. Now, Thomas was still struggling with his injured left thigh following the 85 All-Star game, and there were certain times during this game where his elevation was lacking. Jordan then split 3 defenders, Isaiah Thomas, Tony Campbell, and finally Bill Laimbeer at the rim, and he hit on a gorgeous left-hand layup and won. He made the free throw too.
Beautiful move, that one.
Oh, it's great to watch. And then Thomas immediately made a fool out of me, and he drove the lane and hit on a pretty layup next time down the floor. And I noted down that he was such a creative playmaker, one of the all-time greats, even with injuries. Jordan then dazzled the crowd. On the left wing, he drove strong to the middle and glided in for a lovely finger roll at the hoop and won. And then he made the free throw, giving him 17 points. Now, Tony Campbell was having a great game at this stage. He was 5 for 6 from the field in this contest, and he finished with 10 points. Side tidbit here. One of 10 regular season games where the rookie, who was the 20th pick in the 84 NBA draft, scored in double figures. Off a lead pass from Quinton Daly, Dave Corzine backed his way into the lane and hit a nice layup. Blaha then mentioned that Dave was no longer the receiver of as many boos from the Chicago fans, and then said, I quote, "At least not for now."
I was about to add that in myself, but George
did well. Now, on a semi-fast break, Jordan found a streaking Orlando Woolridge, not literally, for a monster flush. Now, that extended Chicago's lead to 10 points, 59-49. Wes Matthews then had a 2-on-1 break, and he had MJ ahead of him, but decided instead to try and jam over the top of Isaiah Lord Thomas III.
Yeah, that was cool. That was very cool.
A very athletic move, and yet I'm sure Jordan would have appreciated the dish off for a jam of his own, but I appreciated seeing Wes Matthews try and sky over Thomas. Now, I've got here that Jordan then took it to the hoop for what everyone thought would be an easy 2 points. However, nobody told Kent Benson. He rejected that notion, literally and figuratively. In transition, Earl Curitan hammered home 2 points. So what would have been a 12-point Bulls lead was just 8. Benson may have quickly regretted that swat on MJ a few moments earlier because Jordan, with less than 15 seconds left in the half, drove strong to the hoop and pulverized the living daylights out of the ball right in Kent Benson's face. My goodness, that was a great dunk. One of the most underrated jams of Jordan's career too.
One thing that I enjoyed so much about especially rookie MJ, and when he dunked the ball, he made use of that breakaway rim, and he did that on that dunk on Kent Benson. It was a one-handed power flush.
Absolutely flushed it down, and I'm sure that a majority of that had to be in response to the fact that Benson rejected him the previous play or two from that. Absolute certainty.
I have heard a rumor that MJ was the kind of guy who'd remember things, hold a grudge, you know.
Not surprised. Here's a random fact, mate, to close out the first half. Were you aware that Vinnie Johnson had a brother, Eric, who played in the NBA?
Eric Johnson? No, I was not.
Either was I. In the 1990 season, Eric Johnson played 48 games with the Utah Jazz, and in that season, the Johnson brothers actually squared off in one game, Utah at Detroit, February the 4th, 1990. Eric had 4 points, 2 rebounds and 5 assists in 15 minutes. Vinny chalked up 15 points, 4 rebounds and 3 assists in 31 minutes. Oh yeah, the Pistons won by 32 points.
Some of these random players like Eric Johnson.
How dare you disrespect him?
I'd always prided myself on knowing who these random journeyman type players were, simply because that was around the era when I started on basketball cards. So the fact that I've never seen an Eric Johnson, like an NBA hoops or something like that, is just extraordinary.
It is. Vinny Johnson's name is mentioned a fair bit in this episode, so I thought I'll go check it out. And again, thank you to the great basketballreference.com. Incredible website. I use it extensively for research of this podcast, of course. Now, when I looked at Vinny Johnson's player profile page, it actually said relative, and then it listed Eric Johnson. And I thought, hang on, what? I've never heard of him. So I clicked on him, and sure enough, 1990 season, he played 48 games with the Jazz. So surprising that we didn't actually have a basketball card of him pop up in the ensuing years.
It's not always easy keeping up with the Johnsons.
Well, it's definitely hard to keep up with the Joneses. There's 4 brothers. Then we've got the Johnson brothers. Yeah, Brothers in Arms, this episode should be titled. Now, moving on, mate. At the half, the Chicago Bulls led 67-61.
George Blaha commented that Jordan triple clutched on his first score of the half. He hung and gunned in a jumper from the foul line on his way down.
I saw that as well, and I thought, what? He must have saw a completely different highlight than I did, because that was no triple clutch.
The Pistons took their first lead, 72-69, off of Laimbeer's first field goal in the game, taking him to 1-for-62 from the field. Billy turned around his poor shooting first half in this quarter with an array of jumpers from all over the court. Back-to-back scores for MJ, off an and one dunk on John Long, and a score off an offensive rebound put them back up, 74-72. Dave Corzine's first score in the term was an Elijah One-esque fadeaway in the lane. Now, how a Dave Corzine score could remind me of Akeem is a whole different story.
It's a nice tip of the hat there to Dave.
MJ scored on a jump hook over Lamb and then tied the score again off a sailing one-handed dunk past the Pistons' defense. The commentators marveled at how far back he took off from on the dunk. Vinny Johnson went to work in the third quarter on the smaller Wes Matthews for a score. Then Laimbeer took his shooting to 2-for-63 on another jump shot. And I must say, I was always a fan of Laimbeer's shooting style.
It did look good, didn't it? Especially when he was dialing up those threes, particularly from the aforementioned 1990 NBA Finals.
His complete lack of verticality on his jump shot always made me feel good.
Yeah, but he had a really good-looking shot, I thought, given the fact he didn't actually jump.
Yeah, beautiful release. With 3 minutes to go, Akeem Corzine hit another fadeaway, which was sandwiched by 2 terrific microwavable scores. One on a hanging jumper from 15 and another which drew an audible wow from yours truly and 24 points for Vinny Johnson.
Just hang on a second. That sandwich reference and microwave, you had to mean that. Did you?
Yes.
Well done.
Of course. Then super sub Brooke Steppe checked in for Detroit in the third quarter. I confess I didn't pick up on who it was when he came into the game, and through my audio notes, my first few attempts at his name on hearing the commentators say it were someone stepping, Rook stepping, someone stepping. To make up for the disrespect, I shall now follow with a quick rundown on the career of Michael Holbrook Steppe. He played his college ball at the Georgia Institute of Technology and 5 seasons in the NBA with 5.4 points per game, and has the distinction to have played for both the Kansas City and Sacramento Kings. He was once suspended for a game in his rookie season for missing a team plane as a member of the Kansas City Kings. Hello to Brooke if you're listening.
I had to go to Basketball Reference to have a look at this guy's...
Same.
Yeah, his career. He played 5 seasons, as you mentioned, but I think there was a season where he played in the CBA, and then in the latter part of his career, he just missed one of the full seasons. So I'm not sure if he was playing overseas or whatever the case was, but he came back for one more final season. So, yeah, a great find. And the fact that he is called Brook, shortened from, was it Michael Holbrook?
Michael Holbrook.
Yeah, so that's a pretty cool little bit of information there, mate. So I'm glad that you steppied up the research.
Yeah, thank you. I wasn't sure if it was Brook or Brooks or Rook or Rooks. I had no idea until I actually I saw Steppy on the back of his jersey and could actually search for him on Basketball Reference.
Awesome, mate. Absolutely awesome.
A Tony Campbell check-in for Detroit drew an immediate post pass into Orlando Woolridge, who drew yet another foul from rookie Tony Campbell and 2 foul shots. Bill Laimbeer now couldn't miss with back-to-back jumpers late in the third and 4 for 65 shooting on the game.
He was really improving that field goal percentage.
I, at this point, was getting a little concerned with George Blaha and his calling Vinnie Johnson VJ during the game.
It was getting into some nasty territory, to be honest, wasn't it?
Vinnie Johnson was then called on a new rule in the NBA for the 85 season, the breakaway foul, which gave Wes Matthews 2 shots and the Bulls ball, much to Chuck Daly's dismay. Then, just to finish off his electric scoring in the third, the microwave sunk a 3 at the buzzer to finish the term.
Oh, you're on fire with these microwave calls, aren't you? Late in this third quarter, did you notice Dave Bing say, and I quote, "too big, too strong, and too good"?
Yes.
Yeah, he was referring to one of VJ's made jumpers. Hello to Stacey King if you're listening. After 3 quarters, the Detroit Pistons were 3-point leaders. It was 98-95, so we were set up for a very good fourth quarter. Chicago was outscored by 9 points during that third quarter. Brooks Steppy was still in the game early in the fourth quarter, which was good to see. Now, also early in this quarter, George Blaha said something along the lines of, Jawan Oldham says if he could play more minutes in the NBA, he'd be a force. That was followed by awkward silence, as just demonstrated here.
I think that Dave Bing then said immediately after that, he probably won't get the chance.
Yeah, he did. Dave Bing then followed up with that after the awkward silence. And then not long after this happening, with the Pistons on offense, Brook drove the lane, but Steppy wasn't peppy. And Oldham, as if on cue, swatted him into the middle of 1986. And then Blaha said, it was more of a mistake by Brook than a block by Oldham.
Yeah, I know.
What's George on about? Absolutely delusional. Oldham rejected the living daylights out of him. Anyhow, sorry, I got a bit carried away there. Steppy, not too shy, jacking up a jumper, missed a wide-open 16-footer, got his own carom, and then immediately proceeded to launch another. He made it, though, this time, and then not long after, Steppy squared up on MJ. All of a sudden, his confidence had reached new heights, took him one-on-one and hit an absolute circus shot on a hanging jumper. However, he committed the offensive foul on the drive against MJ. So Steppy was really rising to the occasion.
Steppy squared up on MJ. I don't know, it got a giggle out of me.
It did. But I'm really happy to know about this little footnote in NBA history, Brook Steppy. So I'd actually love to get him on the podcast, to be honest, and chat about his career, and that's 100% genuine.
One steppy at a time.
One steppy at a time, exactly right. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single steppy. Right. After some back and forth scoring from both teams, Orlando Woolridge kept the Bulls close. He hit a running banker and reduced the Pistons' lead to just 3. With less than 6 minutes remaining in regulation, Isaiah picked up his 5th foul. He had to sit out, and then Jordan immediately connected on a super running bank shot. Now, speaking of fouls, Laimbeer drew an offensive foul on MJ only a minute or two later, which gave Jordan his 5th foul of the game as well. Mike stayed in the game, subbed out shortly after, and then just as quickly he re-entered the contest. Laimbeer then hit an uncontested open jumper from straight ahead. The Bulls called for timeout, and with 3 minutes 26 to play in the fourth, the Pistons were up by 5.
There's one thing that I enjoy almost more than anything else during this podcast is our Chicago Bulls commentary, 1990s and 1980s references, an open jumper from straight ahead.
It just seeps into the mind.
It does.
You don't even try and align yourself with former commentators. It just happens because you hear them so much via osmosis, I guess. Now, courtesy of Orlando Woolridge's 3-point play, which gave him 31 points for the game, the Bulls tied things up at 119. Later, Jordan tipped in his own miss, which gave him a quiet 43 points. I can't believe I'm saying that. With less than a minute left in the quarter. Isaiah, who had checked back into the game, hit a pair of free throws with 31 seconds left, and that put Detroit ahead by 2. An unlikely hero in Bulls Sydney Green calmly made 2 free throws with less than 20 seconds left in the game, and that tied the scores at 123. Now, to finish the game, nobody bar Isaiah Thomas touched the ball on that final play. He eventually lost the ball as the buzzer sounded, and we were headed to OT. In the overtime session, Kent Benson hit a whirling dervish of a hook shot and won. He made the free throw, and the Pistons were up 126 to 124 with about 4 minutes left. And here is the incredible stat. They wouldn't score again for the rest of the overtime session. So they had a 2-point lead. However, Chicago outscored them 16-3 during the overtime period. Jordan hit on a strong move to the hoop, and he was fouled by VJ. The refs didn't seem to initially call the continuation. Jordan and then Lockery and the Bulls faithful were all livid, but cooler heads prevailed, and it was eventually counted. Jordan made the free throw, and that gave him 47 points.
The continuation was definitely there on that play.
Oh, they replayed it like 2 or 3 times, and it was clear as day that was a continuation. There were numerous turnovers from both teams in the ensuing minutes. The crowd was still into it, though, throughout the entire overtime session. Vinnie Johnson had already fouled out, Corzine would foul out, and then Isaiah picked up his 6th foul as well. All the while, Orlando Woolridge was playing the personal role of pumping up the crowd in the middle of the court, absolutely going berserk. So that was good to see as well. Jordan would hit on a pair of free throws to finish with a then career high, and it was his high for his rookie season, 49 points. Received a standing ovation from the crowd, and this is where you must start thinking, was this indeed a revenge game from Jordan? Did he bottle up all the feelings from that 85 All-Star game, alleged freeze out, and unload it on the unsuspecting Detroit Pistons? The Bulls would win the game 139 to 126 in OT. The Bulls then moved to 25-25 on the season. For Chicago, Jordan had 49 points, 30 of which were in the second half and overtime. Then he threw in 15 rebounds, 5 assists and 4 steals for good measure. Orlando Woolridge had 31 points, Quentin Daly 21. Sydney Green had a great game as well, 16 points and 15 rebounds, I believe.
Yeah, it was in the middle of a bit of a purple patch of play for Sydney Green this game.
Or definitely a green patch, one or the other. For the Pistons, VJ had 28 points and 7 assists.
And 8 different nicknames during the game.
That's right. John Long had 26 points. Zeke had 19 and 9 assists. And Bill Laimbeer, 19 points. Okay, mate. We've now chatted about 2 more of the Chicago Bulls games during this 1985 NBA season. Do you have anything else you'd like to add there, mate? Thanks again for being part of the show, of course.
As always, you're welcome. Just wanted to make mention of a gentleman that we mentioned on the In All Airness podcast in episode number 52 just recently. I was saddened, as I'm sure you were, Adam, to hear of the passing of John Hot Rod Hundley.
Yeah, that was really sad to hear that, actually. One of the most iconic commentators in NBA history, and of course, long-time commentator for the Utah Jazz, most notably, past his playing days, of course.
John Stockton, down the lane, off to Malone, giddy up!
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show, and share my web address with your friends and colleagues, inallairness.com. Check out the podcast archive for plenty more episodes with high-profile guests. Follow me on Twitter at inallairness. Please add your like to the show's social hub, facebook.com/inallairness. Join me next time for another edition of the show.